I'm Dawn Marie Solis with Neuro Awesome Life, and I am here today with Adam Coleman, who is an author, and he's the founder of Wrong Speak Publishing. I bumped into some of Adam's work online in Substacks and reached out right away because I was really moved by some of the ways that Adam is approaching topics of racelessness and things related. And gratefully, he was willing to talk to me. So, Adam, thank you so much for being here. Can you let folks know a little bit more about you?
Sure, and it's my pleasure to be here as well. I guess I always try to tell people like I'm an average American. You know, I happen to be Black, so I know we're going to talk about race. But I'm an IT guy by trade. A couple of years ago, I decided to write a book. I published it myself, and from there, it's been a great journey. So now I basically write full time for multiple publications, including the New York Post, which I write, I want to say weekly at this point. So it's just been a great life transition. And I also public speak. More so now this year, I'm doing more public speaking engagements. So it's just been a blessing for myself. And also, I'm a Christian. So I'll throw that out there.
All right. I appreciate that. I got your book in multiple copies. I have the blurry background on right now. So unfortunately, when I hold that up, it all gets blurred. But the title of your book is Black Victim to Black Victor: Identifying the Ideologies, Behavioral Patterns, and Cultural Norms that Encourage a Victimhood Complex, which I find a really interesting, I cannot wait. I just got this a few days ago. I cannot wait to dig into it. I wish I was more prepared with knowledge of your book for this conversation, but maybe we can come back after I've read the book and really dig in. But would you be willing to share a little bit about, that title's powerful. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so we'll start with the title. The title itself was something that, obviously I came up with one day, but there's a purposefulness to the title. So the title has two meanings. Black victim, talking about, from a very general standpoint as far as Black Americans, but also Black victim to Black victor revolving around myself. So it's a very personal book. When you start diving into it, there's a lot of storytelling. And what people realize, and I started off with telling people, like, anything that you hear me say is coming from a place of love and concern. And if you think otherwise, then stop reading the book, right? So if I'm criticizing because I care, right? Otherwise, I guess people write books because they hate stuff. Sure, that's fair. But that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because, one, I want to express myself, and two, I think there is a deeper aspect to much of this conversation that people either like touch the top of or just act like doesn't exist or it's not as impactful. But the race aspect is kind of like the surface level commentary, right? Much deeper, I'm talking about concepts like family and the importance of family, the importance of fathers. And so I'm telling my personal story as a child who grew up without his father and how that impacted me. I'm talking about feminism in some aspects and what it looks like and how it's affecting children, how it's affecting families. I'm talking about morality, not necessarily from a sense of like harsh judgment, but just talking about just having some sort of moral stance. There's a lot of psychology and human behavior that I dive into within the book. I'm not a psychologist, but I have had psychologists read my book and say that I'm on point. So I'll throw that out there. But I'm very much so interested in psychology, human behavior, and I have a basic understanding of childhood development. If you're someone who notices patterns, as I'm someone who tends to notice patterns, and I try not to let those patterns rule me because sometimes you notice the wrong patterns. But I try to notice patterns and notice things that people aren't noticing. And so that was one of the things I tried to do in the book. But the storytelling, telling my personal story, in some aspects, it reads like an autobiography because I'm mixing my story, my childhood, my failures, my successes in with social commentary. So it's not a boring read. I'm not throwing a ton of stats, you know. And it's not I didn't want to write a political book. There's very little mention on politics. There's one chapter talking about uh, conservatism, but from an aspect of fairness, and how we can say this about certain people. I'm sorry, you can say this about certain people, but to other people, it's not acceptable if you say those things. Is that fair? Is that right? So it's a very deep book. But I think I got the tone right as far as not being super judgmental, not being super harsh, but being like very poignant as to what I'm talking about, being very specific. I try not to use like hyper rhetoric, crazy tones, but it's a real book. That's what I wanted to write.
I really appreciate that. My first book was a similar perspective. I don't like to speak for other people. And that's sometimes gotten me in trouble. I've been a speaker for several years, and some of the criticism I've gotten is it's the Dawn Marie show. And I decided to embrace that and stop feeling shamed by that, because either I believe my story has value or I don't. And it's okay if others don't think my story has value. They're not my audience. That's fine, right? But when we are willing to be basically vulnerable like that, when we're willing to put our own story out there, I think there's a legitimacy and a sincerity that travels with it that attracts people who are looking for that.
Yeah.
My education is in writing and literature and education. And, one of the things they tell you when you're first learning to write is make sure you know who you're writing for, who's your audience. And I think that's a thing that we're not really good at right now in the social media world. We think the whole world is our audience, and then we get really hurt and surprised when there are people who aggressively don't like what we're saying. But one of the things I'm working hard on is to really try to build. I don't know if we ever had people talk about building back into our society. Good exchange of ideas. I'm not sure we've ever had it. I kind of feel like cancel culture has always been there. Like you can look back at newspapers from like the early 1800s, and they were canceling the out of each other. There were town papers that were literally designed to be in opposition to one another. I think it's always been there. It's just easier to see today. And go ahead, share your thought.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. It might be easier and it's more overt. Part of me thinks that maybe it's my age, and the era that I, growing up in. It seemed to be there was obviously like everybody has a bias, everybody has a lean. I'm not completely unbiased. I try to see other people's perspectives, but I have, obviously we have our biases. And I kind of feel like there was closer to neutrality in many ways for most of my upbringing, revolving around news and perspectives and things like that. But as I got older, I started realizing like, if I look at it from an opposite angle, it's like wait a second, they're all saying the same thing. They're all parroting the same talking points. No one has a differing viewpoint. And it tells everybody, well, this is correct. And I'm thinking to myself, well, life isn't that simple. Like there isn't, we could have 100 experts in whatever field, and half of them disagree with each other. Yet they're supposed to be experts. And then the news media is telling me that there's only one perspective, there's only one answer. This is right. Everything else is wrong. And so I think that has made someone like myself and many others skeptical of everybody.
Mhm.
And in regards to cancel culture, it's interesting because the whole cancel culture thing reminds me a lot of, like, within the past few years, of the people who were pro free speech. And I would say halfway through the movement, I started realizing that many of the people who claim to be pro free speech really aren't. They just don't like it when their speech is limited, right? And when they're in power, all of a sudden they're back to being pro censorship. And it's like this constant swing back and forth. Same thing with cancel culture. I've seen the same people who complain about they're being canceled later on, months later, advocate for people to be canceled. Call this person's job. I was like, wait a second, you guys are just criticizing them for doing the same exact thing. And they rationalize it by saying, well, we're actually right and they're wrong. And so, and that kind of brings me to the book a little bit, because I think we get so focused on individuals when people can change. You know, I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago. You know, at the core of me, yeah, I'm the same person, but I'm different. But we should be criticizing behaviors. We should be criticizing actions, consistency, hypocrisy. We should be criticizing those things. Someone could, you know, there are people who've done heinous things who have changed their life and become better people. And that, to me, is, if we can see that, that means that harping in on this person who has made a genuine attempt to change means that people can change. So let's make it less about people and more about the behaviors, the actions. So, like in the book, I don't really talk about Black people. I'm really talking about behaviors, because much of those behaviors exist in all different types of cultures. There's many a times where I talk about, like, I use Black, and then I just don't use anything, because I'm speaking very general. Because, for example, children need their parents for particular reasons. It doesn't matter if they're Black. You know, it's for everybody. If they're experiencing childhood trauma, they don't experience special trauma because they're Black. No, children experience trauma for various reasons, and it affects them very similarly. Doesn't really matter where they're from. I've had people from other countries reach out to me who've read the book, who have felt like, yeah, I went through that, or I know somebody who's going through that. They're not even American, you know. So that's why much of the book is a little bit of a ploy to get people to kind of see that we have more in common than we do different, and that the Black is more used in the book like a case study for humanity. And if you guys can recognize, like, these cultural norms, these behavioral patterns that may exist among some Black Americans, you can see the same thing is happening for other people as well. So when I talk about children growing up in single parent homes, this is not a Black exclusive issue. Most of the people who reach out to me who have the same story don't look like me. And I think that was the thing I was trying to harness, is like these family issues, they spread throughout all demographics, in America especially.
I'm interested. Your book's been out there, I think, for 2 years now.
Yeah, I just celebrated 2 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
One of the things that kind of lit me up as you were initially explaining your perspective for the book is, you said even when you're being critical, it's coming from a place of love.
Right.
I think that's something that is not possibly well understood, at least in American culture.
Mhm.
My background is deep in education and different learning styles and modalities and things like that. I'm old enough that I started thinking about those things before a lot of people started thinking about those things, because I was a different learner. And to be constantly told my way of learning was not acceptable in school.
Mhm.
And I asked one of my math teachers, you mean to tell me that I have to do it your way, and your way I'm getting D's and F's, but there's another completely valid way to do this where I could get A's, and I'm not allowed? And I said, yes. So I think we have this education culture that creates that need for quote unquote rightness. It
Mhm.
must be right. There's only one right. And other people in power are the only ones who can tell me what is right. I can't come up with that on my own.
Mhm.
And it is the rare educator or person in power that actually cares what happens to me in that paradigm.
Yeah.
That when you say, even when I'm criticizing, I'm doing it from a space of love, that might feel possibly not even like real. So if you feel like you have words for explaining that a little bit more, how can you say I'm being critical because I love?
So I think one of the biggest disservice someone can do is allow someone that they care about to repeatedly destroy themselves, and you say nothing about it. So, I have a son. If I see my son doing the same thing over and over and finding no success from it, and it hurts him, let's say emotionally, it hurts him, and I say nothing because I'm afraid that it may hurt his feelings, then I'm robbing him of the possibility of getting better. And I'm just letting him perpetuate something that is, bringing him closer and closer to failure. So if I see a group of people or a culture, or let's say politically, if I see a group of people politically that I generally agree with, but they're doing the same dumb thing over and over, and I just say, well, they're part of my tribe, and just cross my arms and do nothing about it, then I'm culpable for the failure. I just let it happen. And as someone who has failed multiple times in my life, the times that I was able to find success was when I changed my behavior that led me to fail. And there are times that people intervened in my life that said, hey, you're doing this and you should be really doing this. And maybe at first it was like, damn, I really wish they didn't say that to me. But then I thought about it and I was like, you know what? They're right. Like I've told the story before, not too many times, but uh, in my younger years, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I thought, because I was really into cars, I thought I wanted to go to auto tech school to do like auto repair. And I went and did a school tour and I was excited. I was in Nashville at the time. And then I came home to visit in New Jersey. And I stopped by a friend's house and his family was home. And his father, the son and father are all into cars. They got cars in the backyard, they work on it all the time, right? So these are car people. And I went in the living room and I'm talking to his father. And I said, yeah, I'm thinking about going to the school and doing auto repair. He looked at me and said, nah, that's not you. And I was like, damn. but but you know what? The next day and in the days afterwards, I was like, he's right. That isn't me. And I never pursued it. And I'm glad I never did. That wasn't me. That wasn't my, I didn't have that. And he saw that. He was a grown man. He was a father. He looked at me. I didn't have a father. And he looked at me and said, the truth. That's not you. He was absolutely right. And that could have saved me thousands of dollars, heartache, back pain, who knows, going down a direction that I would have likely regretted. So, truth with love, I think, is necessary. I do think that there are people who use truth as an attack, and that's different. And so the reason I made those remarks in the beginning of the book is because I know that there are people who use truth as a weapon to hurt other people, right? I know that there are people, like I use race crime statistics in my book, right? That's supposed to be a thing that you're not supposed to do. But the reason I do it is because I'm highlighting that there may be an issue. I'm not doing it as a weapon, as an attack to say, you're inherently violent, look what's wrong with you. And so I don't shy away from it, but I talk about it from a place of concern and love. And I explain why it might be happening. Whereas I do see people who use those same statistics as a weapon to hurt, to malign, to do all these negative things, claiming to be on the side of truth. Well, we just got to say the truth, as they insult people, as they, go after people. So I do think that truth matters, but I think that how you say it also matters. And I criticize the right for acting like they're robots and they can take anything and everything, and they call the other people snowflakes. I've seen the same behavior where someone tells them the truth and they act just like snowflakes, like, because you're human. Sometimes truth hurts. Sometimes you don't like how someone says something to you or how someone says something in general about something that you like. That's normal, right? We all have our feelings, but I think how you say something ultimately matters. And that's why for one, I'm not like super famous, but that's why I don't really get a ton of pushback from people who have actually read the book, because they've read it and understand where I'm coming from, because I'm so transparent that they get it. Even if they disagree with some of the things I'm saying, they understand why I'm saying it. And I think that's what really matters.
I think that is a vital point, Adam. People who offer opinions before they have knowledge are reacting to something within themselves, whether they realize it or not. I'm not sure there's a human being on the planet that doesn't have some kind of baked-in trauma. We are reactive instead of responsive when we're struggling with something, when something in our past has hurt us in a way that makes us feel like we need to defend ourselves.
Right.
And that can be an event, or it can be a subtle, lifelong, trained perspective. I'm someone, if you ever want to talk about education someday, I'm someone that believes our current education system is actually traumatizing anybody who walks through it, because it doesn't value the human mind, differences in the human species, and it is insistent that there is only certain information that is allowed to be disseminated to young minds. And I'm not personally for that. We're not here to discuss education today, but I do think that part of what we're experiencing is a very horrible outcome of teaching for and studying for the test. We actually get trained to only know just enough to give whatever answer is deemed accurate in that environment. And when we get raised for 13 years or even into college more, right? When we get trained to only have one way of thinking and to arrive there with as little knowledge as possible, we pop out into our adult lives feeling very unstable and very protective of what we think is right. And when we feel like we can be damaged or attacked by someone else's opinion, We become verbally aggressive or violent. Sometimes we become physically aggressive and violent because we're literally protecting ourselves. And so when somebody comes at us and they don't know us, my personal belief, you talk about your enjoyment of psychology. That's my, light and breath. That's where I live. The human psyche, when trained to limit nuance, reject difference, it actually works against our innate nature. We are a diverse creature on this planet. Our beingness is exceptionally diverse. And when we get trained to reject that and told we all must be the same, I think something breaks in us. And so civil discourse becomes almost impossible in that paradigm. I have to pretend, right? If you think differently from me, right? You said 4 or 5 different things about yourself as statements of who you are. If I'm not one of those things, I could be activated to feel like, oh, maybe Adam can't be part of my tribe. Maybe he'd be against me. Maybe he'd work against me. Maybe he'd try to hurt me, right? If I'm not one of the things that you say you are, I could become afraid.
Right.
And it seems to me from what I have read from you and what I'm hearing from you today, that part of what your goal is to help quash some of that fear of each other and get us actually talking to each other. Is that accurate?
Yes, I would say, to kind of from a political standpoint, what I'm trying to get people to do is harness the people who are in the middle, because I see the extremes on either side as like a vacuum, trying to suck in the normal, rational people and play along to their fears, right? And some of those fears are rational, some of them are irrational, some of them are just concerns, and they're trying to suck them into this place of just absurdity, and all because they're scared, they're being demoralized, they become nihilistic, and the extremes are like, join us, because we are too. And we have reasons why you should be. And I see it in both ways. There are times where I could literally, what's interesting, so people kind of understand, I'm a moderate person. I'm relatively in the middle, and my approach is to criticize everyone, right? I have my biases, we all do, but my approach is to criticize everyone. I criticize bad ideas, bad strategy, bad rhetoric. So that's usually my approach. When as someone who used to be like holy, I was a Democrat, liberal, and I just stood in that space. And I left that space to think for myself, remaining somewhere in the middle, and being more exposed to different ideas, and now more exposed to people who are on the right. And it's hilarious to me because they both say the same stuff. You just swap a noun, and it's the same thing. The left says we need to save democracy, the right says we need to save our nation. You can go down the list. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, people don't listen to each other to see how they're being played against each other. I wrote an article not too long ago talking about like the very thing that the political right is talking about in regards to education. The left is too. They just don't realize that they are. Fairfax County, Virginia, has been fighting against the extremists who are in their schools to have some normalcy and to focus more on education. The vast majority of those people voted for Joe Biden. They are not Republicans. They are not on the right. And I'm saying, everybody, you have a common extremist enemy at play, and you're acting like everybody who thinks even marginally different than you is against you. You have a common objective. And the areas that you guys can come together, you're being driven apart by nefarious people who don't want you to see that, who don't want you to come together. We have, in many ways, we have a common, I hate to use this, but we have a common enemy, and they're the small amount of people, the small amount of extremists. They're just really loud and really obnoxious on both sides. I deal with them on both sides. And you guys think that small group is the majority, is the whole, and they're not specific enough as to who they're targeting. So they think that everyone is against them. Both sides think everyone's against them. Both sides think both sides are immoral. Both sides think that both sides are evil. And they don't realize that much of what they want is pretty in line. If they actually just escaped that bubble, if they actually thought for themselves, if they had a critical eye as to the information that is being put towards them. So I think what I'm trying to do is represent the average person who just says, you know, that sounds like a good idea, or that sounds like a bad idea. Because most of Americans, politically speaking, are independents. They are moderate independents. We have swing voters. People act like we don't have swing voters. We have swing voters. It is not a blue, red, right, left. We don't live in a 50-50 democracy. We have apolitical people who've never voted in their entire adult lives. Like, these people exist, and we act like they don't because we live in this hyper-political bubble. And that's why I sometimes tell people, go outside, touch grass, meet people, because the world that you guys are conjuring up does not exist. It's like, and one last thing, I know I've been talking, but like, one last thing I'll say is, I've lived in 5 states, and I've lived in a variety of towns. I lived in urban, rural, and suburban. Most people live in one place throughout their entire lives. So their concept of America, their concept of people, is where they're from. A lot of people don't travel internationally. I've traveled internationally. I have friends who live in various countries. I travel throughout the United States now, especially now. I travel throughout the United States on top of me previously living in other states. People are people. This country is one of the most diverse countries in the world. I live in New Jersey. I fly to Arizona a couple times. It is a different world, completely different environment, different perspectives, different way of living. And I'm in the same country. And you can go a bit north, and it's nothing but mountains, and it's cold. Like, it's a wondrous, huge country. And sometimes I tell people, we have 330 million people that live in this country. Of course, there are different viewpoints. Of course, there are different ideas and different perspectives. Yet we have 2 options to vote for. Like, it's unfair to say, well, they voted for this. It's like, well, you don't know why they voted for that. Like, so opinions are various. A lot of people have a lot of overlapping opinions that are very similar. But ultimately, people are people. And I think many of us want the same end goal.
You just made me so happy. I, like my heart is so with you. And that's part of the point of my YouTube channel, right? If I can give voice to lots of different ideas, but from folks who we don't normally hear from, kind of your average human being, right? And it may not technically be average. You're not average in that you're an author, right? That's actually a really small percentage of the population. Some of us publish books, most of us don't, right? So, but in many other ways, right? You're just the guy doing the thing, raising his kid, like, you're just the guy, right? But you're choosing to be part of a conversation. I loved the idea of a common enemy that is not personal. radicalization in any environment is, in my opinion, an enemy to whatever's trying to be accomplished, because radicalization can only happen if fear dominates. It is a large reaction to intense fear.
Yeah.
When we're afraid, we can think about what our bodies do, right? We tense. When we're afraid, we can have, literally, brain science shows it, we can have only a certain number of thoughts. When we're afraid, we are less capable of seeing an exit strategy. We literally become less capable when we're afraid. And our more primitive pieces of our brain take over. And they do a good job in terms of protecting us. But one of the stories I grew up with, I'm a Second Amendment person. I have my own ideas about what reasonable and rational restrictions on ownership are. We don't need to get into that today. But there were guns in my house when I was little. And my dad removed the guns from the house. I remember the day it happened. He looked at me and he looked at the shotgun and leaning up in the corner against the basement door and got terrified. Grabbed me by the shoulders, pointed and was like, "You see that? You don't ever touch it. You don't ever touch it." And then I never saw it again. I never saw it again. My dad was that afraid. And he told me a story about friends of theirs that became afraid of a report of somebody like wandering around at night looking in people's windows in this one community. The husband worked nights and decided, I'm not there to keep my wife safe. I want her to be safe. Bought her a gun. Unfortunately, didn't teach her how to use it. This is long enough ago that, we didn't have any of those requirements. He came home early from work one day without giving her a phone call first, and she shot him. Gratefully did not kill him, but she shot her own husband because she was afraid. That's what happens to us when we're afraid. We can't see clearly who's in our crosshairs. And to me, that's what's happening with the extremism. When extremists can make us afraid, we will shoot at each other figuratively or literally without having any idea who we're shooting at. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to talk with you is because I felt like I was seeing a fellow, can we please all come to the table, be more rational human being? Because we have to get to know each other. We have to. Or perspectives that have no love will convince us to snipe at each other, to eliminate one another. And that's not something I'm willing to allow happen if I can do anything about it.
So one thing that comes to mind is, so from a religious aspect, I'm perpetually not afraid. Part of the reason is because for many years I spent my life being afraid, being confused, unsure of myself, suffering depression, some suicidality, all of these different things. Why? Because I was afraid. I had a lot of anxiety. Why? Because I was afraid of going to this restaurant that I've never been to before. Why am I afraid of doing that? But once I got over the fear, my life changed. And so coming from that side to where I'm at now, where I'm the complete opposite, I'm perpetually unafraid. And now I was less religious then, and I'm more religious today. And I say that God is on my side. right? And I'm not worried if something was to happen because I've been through worse, right? So I'm not worried about being canceled and losing my job where most people are, because I've been homeless multiple times. I've been through stuff. And I know that even within those hard times, God was with me to make sure that I come out of it. And so I'm not afraid. And what bothers me is that from a right-leaning perspective, I see a lot of conservative Christians who are afraid. And I'm like, if you're a Christian, why are you so scared? Why are you afraid? And I just want people to not be so scared, because like the devil that they think exists, in many ways it doesn't exist. People are afraid to talk because they look at the horror story that pops up in a headline and then they shut up and they don't say anything. But I'm like, I wrote a book while full-time employed, gave it to my boss. My boss is like, great book. I went to another job and I ended up telling them about everything that I'm doing because I was actually going to quit. And they said, no, we support you. And this is a company with DEI and all this other stuff that I'm supposed to be afraid of within corporate America. Are there industries that exist that are harsher than others? Sure. But the vast majority of people don't work at these places. Most people work in small businesses. Most people work at places that aren't so ideologically strong. They're just going with the trend at the moment, and they're scared, and they don't need to be scared. So I just want people to stop being scared, because like you said, it limits your thought process. It makes you reliant on saviors, right? Because now you're too weak to do for yourself. You have to vote for Trump. You have to vote for Biden. You have to vote for someone who's going to save society, save democracy, and you relinquish your power to save yourself, to do what you can do, right? You can't save the world, but you know what you can do? You can be a better parent. You can be a better brother or sister. You can be a better person. You can develop your skill set. Why not focus on those things? And even for me, as someone who's kind of like a political and culture war junkie, I try not to hold everything into politics. It's just an aspect. If the person who gets into power is not the person that I wanted, I'm not going to, I'll move on and I'll do, it's happened before. Guess what? It's usually not that big of a deal. And I don't want people to be scared. I don't want people to be nihilistic. I want people to see that they do have power, and harnessing fear and nihilism relinquishes your power, and lots of people make money off of that too. So yeah, I think fear is a really, really big problem. The extremists play off of it. Politicians make money off of it. They campaign off of it. They make promises, they don't keep them, but it doesn't matter because you're too scared to put them to the challenge. And it just becomes this whole cycle. And what I'm trying to do is see beyond that. That's why I don't hold any political party allegiance. I don't. I think for myself, I vote for whoever I want to vote for. I criticize who I want to criticize. And that's been my stance from the very beginning. So no one can, if I say something that sounds like a Republican, they're like, you're a Republican. I was like, no, I'm not a Republican, actually. If I say something that sounds a little bit liberal, you sound like a Democrat. Well, I'm not a Democrat. Like, I can have a varying viewpoints, an understanding of different people, even people I don't agree with. I can understand why they came to that conclusion. So I think, I don't want to take up too much, but I just want people to think for themselves. I don't care who you vote for. I don't care what side you're on. I just want you to think for yourself and focus on joining people that maybe you didn't think you can join with, because maybe you do have something in common with them.
Adam, this has been amazing. I hate to, this is a little bit shorter than usual, but you and I both have schedules we have to keep. I hope we can talk again. I think there are a lot of different topics that that would do service if we chewed on them together. So I hope I get to talk with you again. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing and that you are willing to put your voice out there in this particular way. I wish you tons of success, and I'll make sure that there are links to your book and and anything else that you would like to have people know about so that they can learn more about what you're doing and the perspectives that you hold. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.